thank Gerhard and Larissa and the team. SAP has been a proud partner of Sales 3.0 for several years and of Selling Power long before that. And I don't get the opportunity often from my friend Gerhard to say nice things in front of so many people. So let me just say this. We all have a lot of business relationships that we go through in the course of a career. And Gerhard is not only an outstanding sales professional, he's not only a great leader, he is a genuinely good human being, the kind who would give you the jacket off of his back to help, and I just don't come across as many of those as I'd like to. So I'd like to just salute Gerhard and thank you for your friendship and your leadership. You're a good man. And yes, I'll sponsor the next event as well. I just know him, so you have to get ahead of these things. Look, it's great to be in Chicago. I lived here for several years. It's a great town. It's a great political town. You'll sense a little bit of a political theme as I take you through my talk today. And I'd be remiss not to tell you a small story that last week I was at an SAP event and had the chance to meet another native of Chicago. So file this under a career bucket list moment, getting the chance to interview Barack Obama on stage. You got to be careful, though, in these kinds of situations, I find. I sort of went into this thinking, oh, well, I can pull one over on the former leader of the free world. So he was very polite and respectful backstage. We went out there, and I asked him about life after the presidency, and he was talking about how great it was to be able to be part of his daughter's lives at this point when they're heading off to university, and he talked about Mrs. Obama and how she had been so successful with the book and putting it to work. I said, well, Mr. President, in fairness, she was our first choice for this event. And he didn't miss a beat, and he shot back, you know what's funnier? She found out that you guys couldn't afford a proper moderator, so she passed. So lesson learned, right? Look, I want to make a few points today. I know you've had a great day of content. It's a real honor for me to be on the stage with so many experts, and you have an infinitely better and more impressive one following me. I remember, and I think we all have stories like this, of the first time I was around a genuinely gifted salesperson. And his name was Rick Freivogel, and I remember Rick, and you almost have to see the image. He was impeccably dressed. He always wore a suit and tie with suspenders, hair impeccably groomed, and just a charming, nice guy. And we went into a really loaded sales call. I was working for a partner of his company. And we walked into this conference room, and we sat down, and they introduced him to get up and make the pitch. And he walked around, and he put a Weeble in front of every person at the table. And then he stood up at the front of the room, and he just started his pitch. And the lead person on the prospect side said, Rick, just apologize for interrupting, but we're all kind of wondering what's up with the Weebles. He says, don't worry, just hang with me through the presentation, and it will all make sense. So he went through and he made the pitch and took about 10 questions from the prospect, and then just as he was wrapping up his closing remarks, he went around and he collected the Weebles, and he put them back in the bag, and he thanked them very respectfully for their time, and he sat back down. And the room's kind of like, what's up with this guy? So the same person said, Rick, I don't think anybody got the connection to the Weebles. And he said, yeah, I know, but if I said that there was a connection, you were going to pay attention to every word I said. And that's it. And so they all kind of looked at each other, and they all realized they paid attention to every word he said, and they gave him the business on the spot. And the reason I tell you that story is because charm like Rick Freivogel has just doesn't scale. So we've got to find other ways to put ourselves in an advantageous situation. And for SAP, we've realized in this experience economy that experience is everything. So what I thought I'd do is just share with you a little bit about how SAP, with our 20,000 sales professionals around the world, has focused in on the idea of experience as a real driver for sales success. I mentioned politics. There are a few things I think we can take from the political process that play nicely in line with the idea of experience. So if you think about the lawn sign is an example of operational data. It's an operational metric in a political campaign. Every campaign that's ever run for office can tell you how many lawn signs they make and where they put them. It's a great reflection of what's been done. But the other piece of information is the polling sample. And that's an example of experience data, or X data, because the polling sample actually comes from the voter. It's voter sentiment. It helps you to understand why people feel the way they feel. And when you can run a campaign with a sophisticated operational data set and a very aggressive outside-in X data set, you can run a pretty successful operation. So just to prove the point, most people would see virtually nothing in common between these two campaigns. And this country is remarkably politically polarized. So people who love one hate the other and vice versa. I'm not looking to make a political sales job here. But what's the one thing that both campaigns had in common? They both took advantage of and led with experience data. In President Obama's case, there was widespread dissatisfaction with the Iraq War, widespread anxiety around the financial crisis. People were ready for hope and change. President Trump's campaign, he took advantage of the fact that many people were beginning to feel left behind and disenfranchised from the establishment. Make America Great Again. Both campaigns took those X data points and they ran campaigns to target the voters who were most naturally suited to buy those messages. In Obama's case, he mobilized young people and he mobilized people in big population centers. In the president's case, he mobilized people who had largely been ignored by the political process and weren't considered to be politically popular. Both campaigns started with X, and they turned it into sophisticated operations. We have got to learn the same lesson in our businesses, and we've got to think about X's and O's. So, like any good presenter, I stole a healthy dose of my thought leadership from this guy. Bruce Temkin is the founder of the Experience Management Institute, which is designed and set up to help companies think experience first in terms of how they build corporate cultures, in terms of how they position products, both from a marketing and from a sales perspective. So the fact that we're here talking today about frictionless selling plays beautifully with the idea of experience management. So let me tell you what Bruce says are the 3 rules he follows when setting up a culture that's experience-centric. Number 1, he says, continuously learn. But let me tell you, there is obviously an important role to play when it comes to professional development. That's why you're here. That's why we're here. But when Bruce says continuously learn, he's not talking about professional development. He's not talking about career training. He's talking about learn about your end consumer. Learn about your stakeholder. He wants us to ask questions about those stakeholders. There's a great researcher, you should look him up, his name's Hal Gregerson. And he writes about what he calls a curiosity deficit. And in Hal's research, he figured out that the highest point in the human experience in terms of asking questions is when we're 5 years old. At 5 years old, you go from the peak point of asking questions and like a straight down to the point where we don't ask questions anymore, whether that's because we're risk averse or because we're afraid we're going to get called on not knowing the answer. So in Bruce's approach, he says, ask questions. Just think of this. In 2019, there are going to be 30 billion more mobile searches than desktop searches. So what do we know about those searches? What do we know about the people and what they're searching for? That is a key piece of information. If we're not asking that question, we can't continuously learn about the shape of our marketplace. That leads to the second point. Propagate insights. Now, again, the idea of building a data-centric culture can sometimes be misunderstood. A data-centric culture isn't a culture in which data is used by precious few to make really big decisions. A data-centric culture is when we as leaders take all the data that comes from asking all those questions, from continuously learning, and we make that data available to every person at the precise moment where it's likely to influence their behavior, so that they'll actually change something, so that they'll actually be more successful. So the idea of propagating insights is about democratizing data. Oh, I got a great political theme here. I didn't even plan that one. But it's about really making it available to everybody. So ask yourself, how available is data about a metric like 30 billion mobile searches more than desktop searches to the people on your teams who are out there trying to sell? Odds are in most of our companies it's not as pervasive as we'd want it to be, which is why this is such an important step in building an experience-centric culture. And the third point, rapidly adapt. Now, I tell you from personal experience at SAP, this is a hard one. Our best sellers, the best sales professionals we have, you can teach them nothing because they have a secret sauce and they know what works and they got the relationships they need to deliver the number. The majority of people are looking for the edge. So the edge in Bruce's methodology comes from inspiring the first part, which is the desire to learn, giving them the tool, which is the ability to see the insight needed, and then finally, the courage to adapt the strategy in process. Very difficult to do, but if you can string those three things together, then you have got an experience-centric culture that starts on the outside and works its way to the inside. So I go back to the political space, because sometimes when you think outside in, people say, I mean, you know, you can't take what people tell you verbatim and just recycle it, because then you're not producing anything of unique value. So people in the political space who didn't like polling would say, polling is the equivalent of holding up your finger to see which way the wind is blowing. People who follow polls have no soul. They don't actually have a belief. That's the statement. What John McCain always used to say, which I thought was brilliant, I don't necessarily need polling samples to know what I believe. I need polling samples so I can more effectively communicate what I believe in terms that people will understand. So the idea of outside in, of taking input from the experience of your stakeholders and using it as a driving force in the go-to-market motion, in the customer conversation, that idea is about making the value proposition we all have more relevant because we're presenting it in terms that people will find relevant and familiar in their own lives. So if I was going to make two big recommendations to you today, the first part is to follow and think critically about what Bruce Temkin says. And by the way, he's got great content out there. I would highly encourage you to look him up. He's on LinkedIn. Really, really good material, and I read everything he writes. He's really good. The other half of my recommendation, again, coming from SAP's experience, is to think about stakeholders in terms of the outcome that you'd like to achieve. And again, this is part of being an experience-centric company. So the first one for us is the customer relationship, and I know that's been talked about today. I know Gerhard talked about it earlier. It's obvious that the customer experience is a rallying cry. I mean, a lot of good companies in the technology industry, like SAP and our peers, who are making the customer experience a major priority. But ask yourself how much you really know. Again, in the spirit of Bruce's three pieces. How much do you really know about what the experience is that your customers are going through? If there were, for example, a point in the buyer's journey that was turning off 35 to 45% of prospects, wouldn't you have an interest in knowing that? Of course, we all would. If we could figure out what parts of the customer experience were working and those that wouldn't, we would absolutely train our rigor and our effort on adapting the parts that weren't working. So you can't figure that out unless you're sensitive to it and unless, in many cases, you ask. So ask customers, not just the ones you already have, but the prospects as well. Ask them about the experience that they're having. Ask them what parts of the buyer's journey are effective and successful and which ones turn them off. Knowing it will make us more successful in selling what we have to sell. The second part is the product experience. Now, again, from our experience, I can tell you, in SAP, we have 100,000 employees worldwide. We have about 20,000 sales professionals. We have about 20,000 engineers. And if ever you are going to find two cultures diametrically opposed, the engineering culture and the sales culture, there ain't a lot in common there. And we constantly struggle about how do you bring those two pieces together. Well, increasingly, the sales profession in our company is getting more integrated into the engineering culture precisely because how our customers use our products is driving exactly how we build them. And the idea, and our founder tells this story beautifully. He was one of 5 people who founded the company, 5 engineers. He said, well, 46 years ago, we used to code an application, go out and trial it with one of our customers, watch how they used it, adapt the product based on what they used and what they didn't. But then companies scale, and they get to a point where the layers between people who use the product and people who build the product get bigger and bigger and bigger. So for people who are on the front lines in the selling professions, dealing with customers, ask, how are people using these products? The sales cycle doesn't end once they buy. It has to continually refresh so that we can use that information, that experience data, to make the product stickier, to make a repeat purchase more likely, and to increase the likelihood of a cross-sell or an upsell. So the idea of moving products together with selling is critical, and the product experience has to be a major driver of that. And the third is the employee experience. I feel for our colleagues in HR. Said no one ever. I'm just kidding. But the HR teams have taken a bad rap for all these years because somehow somebody thought we could outsource employee morale to a team in a company. I got news. That is a recipe for failure. Every one of us who is a leader has a responsibility for the employee experience. And have you ever heard of a website called Glassdoor? So Glassdoor is helping you sell or is hurting you. Because I don't know about you, but when I consider doing business with a company, I'm curious to see what the employees say about working there. I make decisions about buying decisions in my consumer life based on whether or not employees like working for a company. I think a lot more people are doing that these days than we even realize. A lot of people are looking about whether or not you approve of the CEO's job performance. Because a company where the CEO isn't popularly reviewed by its own employees probably is having operational trouble that may not have shown up yet in the products or services that are delivered. So the idea of using the sales profession to draw employees from across the business into the customer-facing context, bring employees along, make them feel like they're part of the sale. The closer we bring employees to the sales process, the more energized our companies are going to be, because we're not going to be dealing with layers and layers of bureaucracy. Everybody is going to see that they have a direct role to play in driving the success of our businesses. My boss, Bill McDermott, who's a great CEO and a great sales leader before that, he has a saying, we need to connect every person inside our company to every person outside our company. Our ability to do that will drive a culture that is inherently outside in, inherently focused on the experience, and ready to win. So the final experience of the 4, customer experience, the product experience, the employee, is the brand experience. Now, I admittedly oversee the marketing organization for SAP, so this one's a little bit close to my heart. And by the way, as the person who oversees the marketing team for SAP, it's always a wonderful experience when I'm out with the CEO and people say, oh, SAP, like when on the remote control you want to get the Spanish on the TV. And the CEO always looks at me like, how much do we spend on marketing this brand? But look, the brand experience is another one of those. It can either help you or hurt you while you're sleeping. Nike is so spectacularly good at this. Nike has done so many things with its brand over the years that people look at and even write about in the context of, wow, that's a bold brand statement. They're really making a bold statement about this or that. Let me tell you something right now. Nike knows every single move it makes with its brand in terms of how it's going to drive its business outcomes. They know where their brand constituency is. They know who's going to buy shirts and shoes, and they don't do anything if it's not going to help them sell shirts and shoes. So what do we know about our brands? What do we know about the audience who's judging our brands? Amanda's going to come up here in a few minutes and talk to you about an audience that is very misunderstood. People are looking at your brands almost as closely as they're looking at your products. So again, as a selling professional in an experience economy, we want you to know about brand sentiment, whether or not people like the stuff you're putting up on YouTube, whether they care about the things that you're standing up for. So that's an important piece of this as well. So those are the four. I think that I think that they're critical. They really helped clarify and focus SAP. Again, we've got a unifying focus on experience in our company, and I think a big company like SAP with 100,000 employees, there's always the risk that companies can be navel-gazing in their culture. Self-obsessed about what we do, self-obsessed about how we run. But focusing on experience has changed the culture in our company. It has forced us to look at our stakeholders and our experience metrics differently. So it's an X data to no conversation for us as opposed to just products and how we sell them. So in closing, I'd just tell you a quick story about Bill McDermott. That was him at this event. He was being interviewed by Gerhard in Las Vegas. Bill's a gifted sales leader. And much in the same way sometimes you got to be careful with Razin, former presidents. It's always interesting when you try to give a truly gifted seller sales advice. Bill wrote a book, Winner's Dream, and it's done really well. And I remember 5 years ago, we were at an event in Atlanta, where Amanda's from, and he had just submitted the final copy. Hadn't even hit the shelves yet, but it's all he was thinking about. He's got he's got the book. It's about his life. I said, Bill, there's 7,000 people out there in that auditorium, and they don't know you. There is a time to introduce yourself, make a great first impression, and there's a time to sell people books. My recommendation is you use this opportunity to go out and make a really incredible introduction of Bill McDermott. And then when it hits Amazon, they're going to go looking. He's like, Nick, I can't thank you enough for always being honest with me and for your candor and for your counsel. Great. So he gave me a high five. They introduced me, went up on stage. He stood stage center, as only Bill can do, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I wrote a book called Winner's Dream, and it's going to hit Amazon very soon, and I'd like all of you to buy it. And I stood in the background, and I said, well, there you go. That's that's his way. So, and then he came back and he said, I just felt like it was the right moment. I said, Bill, I fully agree. Bill. It was the right moment, and I never gave him advice on how to position products or services ever again. So anyway, look, I share that story with you as a sign of respect because I know how hard it is to do what you do. The fact that you've committed and invested time to come to this event proves how seriously you take it. We sponsor it because we care about this experience as well. We're in this with you every single step of the way. And I just want to again thank Gerhard and Larissa and Alice for all the excellence you have in hosting this event. And thanks for your time this afternoon.